back to the big B-17 build. To recap what's been done so far, I've got the prototype main gear built and tested, and I've built out the three-piece horizontal stabilizers and elevator. So now it's time to tackle the start of the fuselage construction. So I've used a lot of various techniques to build fuselages before, but for this build I've settled on another technique that I'm borrowing from John Morgan. Notice a trend here? So in this technique I'm going to start with a profile of the fuselage and vertical stabilizer, and I'm going to add half formers to it, similar to like an old Gillows build. Then I'm going to sheet over those formers with foam. Once the first side's done, I'll flip it over and do the other side, removing most of the former material and the profile material as I go. So that'll leave me with a foam shell that will then be sheeted with 1/16 inch balsa, finished in fiberglass. So in addition to the plans here, you can see I've got a few parts laid out as well. One of the reasons I went with 1/9 scale is that there's some really nice fiberglass parts available in that scale from wingspan models. This includes the upper fuselage and cockpit area, the chin turret and fairing, and the characteristic Cheyenne tail gunner area from the B-17Gs. I've also picked up a set of engine cowlings from them, and together these parts are going to save me a ton of time. Also laid out here is a mechanical tail retract from Robart. Now this is servo driven, and the operation and steering servos will be located as far forward in the fuselage as I can manage. So that's enough talk for now. Let's get started. Alright, so like I said at the beginning of this build video, what I'm going to be doing for the fuselage is taking a large profile of the B-17 and then attaching half formers to it. So, in that vein, here's my large profile. You can see where I've already marked out the individual locations for the formers. Now I'm on to actually modifying the formers themselves to work with this build method. Let me show you how I do that. So here's one of the templates for the formers from the B-17. You can see I've already drawn a line right down the center. The first thing I need to do is actually accommodate the thickness of that central profile section. So what I'm going to do is just mark off 3 millimeters on either side of this line, and then I'm going to use a straight edge and mark that off. Alright, so that will accommodate my central section. Let me go ahead and cut this former out along the outside edge, and I'll be right back. Now what I have to do is accommodate the 6 millimeter thickness of the foam that's going to be sheeting the outside. And to do that, I have this little tool right here, super easy. It's just a little ballpoint pen glued to a piece of wood with enough spacer in there that it's exactly 6 mil here. Makes it really quick and easy to just drag this along the outside and mark where I need to trim off for the thickness of that foam. And there you go. Now let me go ahead and trim that off. Now all I have to do is go through and remove this 6 millimeter slice right through the center. Now on this particular one, I'm only going to remove it here at the outside edges, and then I'm going to trim out this piece of foam in the center. We've got a completed set of formers here that'll be attached to my central profile, and I was able to salvage a big chunk of foam to use elsewhere. I'm using a scroll saw to do all of my cuts, and you can see it gives a nice clean edge. It's going to make it really easy to sheet this fuselage.
The formers are attached to the profile with Gorilla Glue and held in place with T-pins. Weight the profile down so it doesn't warp while the glue sets. A single carbon fiber stringer was added, and the sheeting was installed between the formers. In simple areas, your sheeting may be able to span multiple formers, but in more complicated areas, it may be easier to just sheet between adjacent formers. Again, Gorilla Glue and T-pins were used here. Once the first side is fully sheeted, I began applying the formers to the opposite side. You can see as I work my way back, I'm removing a large portion of the central profile. Not only does this save weight, but with the center removed, it is much easier to ensure your former halves line up perfectly. Be sure to keep everything straight and true. The fuselage is already stiff with the sheeting on one side, but until both sides are sheeted, warping is a risk. The only plywood in the aft former area will be the mount point for the tailwheel retract unit. Using the appropriate former template as a starting point, I fabricated the bulkhead. It has strategic bracing to support the mount blocks, and the retract unit will bolt in with 632 bolts. Guide tubes were added for the pull-pull cables, and there's plenty of clearance for the retract push rod. When I was happy with the retract bulkhead, I secured it in the fuselage with Gorilla Glue, ensuring it was perfectly aligned before the glue setup.
That's as far as I'm going to take this video. I've made a lot of progress, but I'm not quite ready to close up the fuselage. Before I put the sheeting on the backside, I'm going to take the opportunity to install the servo tray and the push rod for the tail wheel, and I'll run a wiring channel to keep things clean and save myself headaches when it comes time to wire everything up. I'll cover that in the next video. along with the rest of the foam sheeting, the balsa sheeting, and a lot more. There's still a long way to go, but seeing the B-17 on the bench every day, keeping me motivated. Thanks for following along, and we'll see you next time.